I need to get this off my chest because what happened 3 weeks ago has completely turned my world upside down and I'm still processing how my own family could treat me this way. So, here's the backstory. I'm 68 years old, been retired for 6 years from my job managing a small investment firm. My grandson Tucker is 24 and I basically raised him after his parents Eric and Stephanie died in a car accident when he was 9. His aunt Amy helped some, but most of the heavy lifting fell to me. I put Tucker through school, helped him with homework every night, drove him to every soccer practice and debate club meeting. When college time came around, I made sure he had everything he needed financially. Tucker met Harper last year at some corporate networking event. She works in marketing for her family's business, comes from money, drives a BMW that's probably worth more than most people make in a year. The few times I met her, she seemed polite enough, but there was always this weird tension, like she was judging my house, my clothes, the way I talked. Tucker started changing after they got serious, stopped coming around as much, made excuses when I invited them for dinner. Then 3 weeks ago, I get this black envelope in my mailbox. Heavy cardstock, silver lettering. I figured it was their wedding invitation, right? Wrong. The card inside was completely black with silver text that read Toxic Bloodline Band stamped across the top in big letters. Below that it said, "Your presence is not requested at the union of Tucker Williams and Harper Morrison. Consider this your final notice that your parasitic influence ends here. The new generation chooses wealth over welfare." I stared at that thing for probably 20 minutes. This wasn't some joke or misprint. My own grandson, the kid I raised, was officially uninviting me from his wedding. But wait, it gets so much worse. 2 days later, Amy calls me freaking out. She's seen Harper's TikTok account where Harper posted a video of herself literally burning a photo of me while dancing in her wedding dress. The caption read, "No gold-digging grandparents at our wedding, cleansing the toxic energy before the big day. #new money, #choose your family, #wealth not welfare." The video had already gotten 50,000 views and hundreds of comments from people I don't even know, calling me everything from a leech to a manipulator. I tried calling Tucker immediately. Went straight to voicemail. Tried texting. Nothing. Finally, I drove to his apartment complex and waited in the parking lot for 3 hours until he came home from work. When he saw me getting out of my car, he actually rolled his eyes and told me he didn't have time for this drama. Drama. I asked him what the hell was going on and why his fiancée was posting videos burning my picture on social media. Tucker stood there in that parking lot and told me that Harper had opened his eyes to how I've been emotionally manipulating him his entire life. That every time I helped him with school or money, I was actually creating dependence so he'd never leave me. That I guilt-tripped him into spending time with me instead of building his own life. He said Harper's family had shown him what real successful people look like, and that he needed to cut ties with anyone who represented his poor mindset. I reminded him that I'm the one who paid for his college, helped him get his first job through my connections, co-signed his apartment lease because he had no credit. Tucker actually laughed and said that just proved his point, that I used money to control him and make him feel obligated to me. He said Harper's family invests in people's success without strings attached. And that's the difference between old money and desperate money. Then he drops this bomb. He tells me that they live-streamed their wedding gift opening session on Instagram the night before. And when they got to the empty space where my gift should have been, Harper held up the spot and said, "Good thing Grandpa's too poor to send anything real. More room for presents from people who actually matter." Tucker was right there laughing, adding that I probably spent my last $20 on that pathetic black card I sent them. But here's what really got me. During that live stream, which I found and watched later, Stephanie was in the comments section cheering them on. My own sister-in-law, Eric's sister, writing, "We should have cut him off years ago. Dead weight finally gone." Harper's cousin, ILA, was commenting things like, "Finally free from trailer trash genetics," and "No more poverty mindset contaminating the bloodline." I stood in that parking lot listening to my grandson tell me that his new in-laws had explained to him how I represent everything wrong with his old life. How successful families invest in each other's growth instead of creating emotional debt. How Harper's parents had already set up a trust fund for their future children that I could never compete with. He said I needed to accept that I was being replaced by people who could actually help him build generational wealth. The conversation ended with Tucker telling me that if I tried to contact him again or show up at any family events, Harper's father, Roy, would handle it through legal channels. Apparently, Roy is some kind of lawyer who specializes in protecting families from unwanted interference. Tucker said they'd already discussed getting a restraining order if I couldn't respect their boundaries. I drove home that night and spent the next week going through every photo, every school project, every birthday card Tucker had given me over the years. All those times he told me he loved me. All those talks we had about his future. All those moments when he needed help and I was there without question. Was I really as controlling and manipulative as Harper convinced him I was? Did I actually create some kind of unhealthy dependence? But then I started thinking about the money side of things. Tucker's college fund, his car payments, the security deposit on his apartment, even his credit history. A lot of that foundation came from financial arrangements I set up years ago through my investment connections. Arrangements that were supposed to help him build a stable future, not create dependence. That's when I made some phone calls to my financial advisor and my attorney. Turns out there are some things about Tucker's financial situation that Harper's family might not fully understand. Some things that Tucker himself might not even realize since he was so young when everything was set up. I've been sitting on this information for the past week trying to decide what to do with it. Part of me wants to just walk away and let them build their perfect new life without me. But another part of me thinks they deserve to understand exactly what they're walking away from. And maybe, just maybe, they should face some natural consequences for how they've treated someone who spent 15 years putting Tucker's needs first. So Reddit, what would you do? Because I'm about to make some decisions that are going to change everything for Tucker and Harper's perfect little plan. Update 1. You guys were right about everything in the comments. I should have acted sooner instead of sitting there questioning myself. The past 4 days have been absolutely insane and I need to tell you what went down because this situation just exploded in ways I never expected. So, I took the advice from several of you who said I needed to stop being nice and start protecting myself. I called my financial advisor Declan on Monday morning and had him pull all the documentation for the educational trust, the credit building accounts, and the investment portfolio I set up for Tucker when he turned 18. Turns out the situation is way more complicated than even I realized. When Tucker's parents died, the life insurance settlement was substantial. I was named as Tucker's guardian and financial trustee until he turned 25, which means I've been managing close to $400,000 in various accounts for the past 15 years. The college payments, car loan assistance, apartment deposits, all of that came from his trust, not my personal money like he assumed. But here's the kicker that even I had forgotten about until Declan reminded me. The trust has a clause about beneficiary conduct and family relationships that I insisted on back then, specifically to protect Tucker from making poor financial decisions before he matured. Tucker thinks his monthly income supports his lifestyle. But there's a $1,200 automatic monthly transfer from his trust that he's never questioned. His credit score that got him approved for that apartment built on secured credit cards funded by his trust. Even his car insurance has been paid through a trust account for 6 years. The kid has no idea how much of his financial foundation depends on arrangements I control. I drove to Tucker's workplace Tuesday afternoon and waited in the parking lot until his shift ended. When he came out and saw me, he immediately started walking faster toward his car, but I caught up and told him we needed to talk about his finances. He stopped and turned around with this condescending look and told me that Harper's father, Roy, had already explained to him how I probably set up some kind of manipulation scheme to keep him dependent on me. I handed him a folder with copies of all his trust documents and told him to read them carefully. Tucker took one look at the paperwork and said he didn't need to review anything because Harper's family attorney was going to help him transfer everything into accounts that I couldn't touch anymore. He said Roy had explained that grandparents who use money for emotional control usually set up accounts with confusing terms to keep beneficiaries confused about their own assets. That's when I told him that the trust doesn't transfer to his control until he turns 25 and that there are conduct clauses that could affect his access if he violates the terms. Tucker actually laughed and said that sounded exactly like the kind of manipulative legal trap that Roy warned him about. He said, Successful families don't create financial arrangements designed to control their children's behavior, and Harper's family invests in growth and independence instead of dependence and guilt. I tried to explain that the clauses were designed to protect him from making major financial mistakes before he fully matured, not to control his relationships. But Tucker cut me off and said that Harper had already shown him examples of how healthy, wealthy families structure their children's finances. Apparently, her parents set up investment accounts that their children could access freely at 18 with no strings attached and no behavior requirements. The conversation got heated when I pointed out that Harper's parents didn't have to worry about their 18-year-old children losing everything to bad decisions because they had family wealth as a safety net. Tucker's trust was designed differently because he only had me and I needed to make sure the money lasted until he was mature enough to handle it responsibly. Tucker said that was exactly the kind of poverty mindset thinking that Harper's family had helped him recognize. He told me that Roy had already reviewed the trust structure and identified several ways that Tucker could challenge the conduct clauses in court if I tried to use them against him. Apparently, Roy specializes in helping people break free from financial arrangements that were set up by controlling family members. Tucker said Roy had handled similar cases where grandparents or parents used trusts to manipulate their children's life choices and that the courts usually side with the beneficiaries. Then Tucker dropped this bomb. He said Harper's family had offered to help him restructure his entire financial situation so that he wouldn't need to depend on manipulative arrangements from his past. Roy had apparently identified ways to consolidate Tucker's assets into new accounts that would be completely independent of my involvement. Harper's father even offered to co-sign new credit lines and investment accounts that would give Tucker more financial freedom than the trust allowed. I asked Tucker if he understood that challenging the trust could mean losing access to the monthly transfers and account benefits he'd been receiving. He said Harper had already calculated his actual monthly expenses and determined that he was living below his means anyway. Apparently, her family had shown him investment strategies that would generate better returns than whatever conservative approach I had chosen for his trust. The conversation ended with Tucker telling me that he was meeting with Roy on Thursday to begin the legal process of extracting himself from my financial control. He said Harper's family had made it clear that they don't believe in using money to maintain relationships and that they were committed to helping him achieve true financial independence. Tucker said once everything was transferred to his control, we could have a relationship based on genuine affection instead of financial obligation. I got home that night and called Declan immediately. He reviewed the trust documents and confirmed that the conduct clauses are actually pretty solid and that challenging them would be expensive and time-consuming. But he also pointed out that if Tucker has competent legal representation, he might be able to argue that the clauses are overly restrictive. The real issue is that Tucker has no idea how much his current lifestyle depends on the trust, and if he successfully challenges it but then loses access to the monthly support, he could end up in serious financial trouble. Declan suggested that I could invoke the conduct clauses based on Tucker's public humiliation of me and his stated intention to cut me out of his life. The trust specifically mentions maintaining family relationships and showing respect for the grantor. He warned me that taking that step would basically declare war on Tucker and Harper's family, and that Roy might be good enough to find ways around the clauses. Wednesday night, Amy called me and said she'd been watching Harper's social media accounts and that Harper had posted another TikTok about cutting toxic family members out of your life. The video showed Harper and Tucker burning old photos and cards, talking about how liberating it was to choose your family instead of accepting dysfunction. The comments were full of people praising them for setting boundaries with manipulative relatives. But here's what really got me angry. In the video, Tucker held up a birthday card I'd given him last year and read part of it out loud before throwing it in the fire. The card said how proud I was of the man he was becoming and how much I looked forward to watching him build his own family someday. Tucker read it in this mocking voice and said, "That's exactly the kind of emotional manipulation they were freeing themselves from." I stayed up until 3 o'clock in the morning going through all the legal paperwork and financial records. Tucker has no idea what's coming if he actually follows through with this legal challenge. But I also realize that Harper's family isn't stupid. If Roy is as good as Tucker thinks he is, they might have a real strategy for getting Tucker out of the trust without him losing his financial support. Tomorrow is Thursday, which means Tucker is meeting with Roy to start the legal process. I've made my decision about what I'm going to do, But I wanted to update you guys first because your advice has been incredibly helpful. Some of you said I should fight back. Others said I should just walk away. Well, I've decided I'm not walking away from 15 years of my life without making sure Tucker understands exactly what he's giving up. Update 2. Reddit. I cannot believe what has happened over the past 5 days. This situation has gone completely nuclear and I'm honestly questioning whether I even know my grandson anymore. The legal meeting happened and the fallout has been absolutely insane. Thursday afternoon, I decided to do something I never thought I'd have to do. I called Declan and told him to invoke the conduct clauses in Tucker's trust immediately. I know some of you said I should wait and see what Roy came up with, but after watching that video of Tucker mocking my birthday card, I was done playing nice. Declan filed the paperwork that afternoon, which meant Tucker's monthly transfers were suspended pending a review of his behavior toward me as the grantor. I didn't tell Tucker what I'd done. I wanted to see how his meeting with Roy went first. And honestly, I was curious whether Harper's family was as smart as they thought they were. Well, Friday morning, I got my answer when Tucker came pounding on my front door at 7 a.m. I've never seen him that angry in his entire life. He stood on my porch screaming that I had sabotaged him right before his meeting with Roy and that his rent payment had bounced because his checking account didn't have the automatic transfer he was expecting. Tucker said Roy had explained to him that this was exactly the kind of financial manipulation that abusive family members use when they feel threatened, and that I had proven Roy's point perfectly by cutting off his money the moment he tried to gain independence. I let him into the house and tried to explain that the conduct clauses weren't about manipulation. They were about protecting the trust from beneficiaries who might make decisions that go against the original intent. Tucker cut me off and said that Harper's family had already warned him that I would probably try to use the trust to punish him for setting boundaries. He said Roy had prepared him for this exact scenario and that they already had a strategy to counter it. The conversation got really heated when Tucker told me that Harper's parents had offered to cover his expenses while Roy challenged the conduct clauses in court. Apparently, they'd calculated that it would cost about $15,000 in legal fees to break the trust completely. But Harper's father was willing to invest that money to help Tucker gain his freedom. Tucker said that proved the difference between people who use money to control others and people who use money to empower others. I asked Tucker if he understood that challenging the trust could take months or even years and that Harper's family would essentially be supporting him financially during that entire time. Tucker said that's what real family does. They invest in each other's success without creating dependence or obligation. He said Harper's parents had made it clear that they didn't expect him to pay them back because that's how wealthy families operate when they want to help someone. Then Tucker dropped this bombshell. He said Harper's family had done some research into my financial background and discovered that I wasn't actually as well off as he'd always assumed. Apparently Roy had looked into my retirement accounts and investment portfolio and determined that the trust represented a significant portion of my total assets. Tucker said Harper's family realized that I was probably using the trust to maintain some kind of financial security for myself, and that's why I was so desperate to control it. I was completely stunned. Roy had somehow accessed information about my personal finances, which seemed wrong on multiple levels. But Tucker said Roy had explained that this kind of research was standard practice when dealing with potentially manipulative family arrangements. Tucker said the investigation had revealed that I was probably more dependent on controlling the trust than he was dependent on receiving it. The conversation got really ugly when Tucker accused me of setting up the conduct clauses because I knew that eventually he would want to be independent and I needed a way to force him to keep me in his life. He said Harper's family had shown him examples of other cases where grandparents or parents used trusts to prevent their children from moving on with their lives. Tucker said Roy had handled several similar situations where controlling family members disguised financial manipulation as protection. I tried to explain that I set up the trust with conduct clauses because I was terrified that Tucker would make the same kinds of financial mistakes that his father Eric had made before he died. Tucker's parents had been terrible with money, constantly borrowing against their future and making impulsive decisions that left them financially unstable. I wanted to make sure Tucker had a safety net that would prevent him from falling into the same patterns. But Tucker said that was exactly the kind of generational trauma thinking that Harper's family had helped him recognize. He said wealthy families don't operate from a place of fear and scarcity. They operate from abundance and trust. Tucker said Harper's parents had never worried about their children making financial mistakes because they raised them with proper financial education and surrounded them with successful mentors. The argument escalated when I pointed out that Tucker had never actually been financially independent. So, he had no idea whether he could manage money responsibly without the trust support. Tucker got really angry and said that was the most insulting thing I'd ever said to him and that it proved Harper was right about my need to keep him feeling small and dependent. Tucker left that morning by telling me that Harper's family was going to help him prove that he was more capable than I'd ever given him credit for. He said Roy was confident that they could break the trust and that Tucker would be financially stable without my interference. Tucker said once the legal battle was over, he wanted to sit down and have an honest conversation about whether we could have a relationship based on mutual respect instead of financial control. Saturday morning, Amy called me in a panic. She'd been watching Harper's social media, and Harper had posted a long Instagram story about toxic family members who use money to manipulate their children. The post included screenshots of text messages between Tucker and Harper where they discussed my decision to suspend his trust payments. Harper had captioned the screenshots with comments about how abusive families always escalate their control tactics when their victims try to escape. But here's what really got me angry. Harper's post included details about Tucker's financial situation that should have been private. She mentioned specific amounts from his trust, his monthly expenses, even his credit score. Harper was basically crowdsourcing sympathy by sharing Tucker's personal financial information with thousands of strangers on social media. Sunday afternoon, Tucker sent me a long text message that was clearly written with Harper's help. The message said that he understood I was probably scared about losing control over his life, but that he needed me to respect his decision to become financially independent. Tucker said Harper's family had offered to help mediate a conversation between us once the legal issues were resolved because they believed in healing family relationships rather than destroying them. The text also included an ultimatum. Tucker said if I continued to fight the trust challenge in court, he would have no choice but to cut off all contact with me permanently. But if I voluntarily dissolved the trust and transferred control to him, we could work together with Harper's family to rebuild our relationship on healthier terms. Tucker said Roy had assured him that I would ultimately lose the legal battle anyway, so cooperation would save everyone time and money. I spent Sunday night going through old photo albums and letters from Tucker over the years. I found the thank you card he wrote me when I paid for his college graduation trip, where he said I was the best grandfather he could have asked for and that he hoped to make me proud. I found birthday cards where he talked about how grateful he was for everything I'd sacrificed for him. Looking at those letters next to the text message he sent me Sunday, it's like they were written by completely different people. Monday morning, I called Declan and told him to prepare for a full legal battle. I'm not dissolving the trust voluntarily, and I'm not backing down from the conduct clauses. If Tucker wants to challenge me in court with Harper's family money, then we'll see how committed they really are to helping him when the legal bills start adding up. Declan warned me that this decision could permanently destroy my relationship with Tucker, especially if Harper's family convinces him that I'm fighting purely out of spite. But I've realized that my relationship with Tucker was already destroyed the moment he let Harper's family convince him that 15 years of genuine love and support was actually manipulation and control. The preliminary hearing is scheduled for next month. Tucker has no idea what he's walking into, and honestly, I'm not sure Harper's family understands the complexity of what they've gotten themselves involved in either, but I guess we're all about to find out. Final update, Reddit. I don't even know where to start with what has happened over the past 3 weeks. This whole situation has completely imploded in ways that nobody saw coming, and I'm honestly still processing everything that went down during the legal proceedings. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for last Monday, and I have to admit, I was nervous about facing Tucker in court, but when I got there with Declan, Tucker looked absolutely miserable. He was sitting with Roy and Harper, but something was clearly wrong. Harper kept checking her phone and whispering urgently to Roy, and Tucker just stared at the floor the entire time. The hearing started with Roy presenting his challenge to the conduct clauses, arguing that they were overly broad and designed to maintain inappropriate control over an adult beneficiary. But then Declan started presenting our defense, and that's when everything began to unravel for Tucker in ways I never expected. Declan had prepared a detailed financial analysis showing exactly how much Tucker's lifestyle had been subsidized by the trust over the past 6 years. We're talking about $1,200 monthly transfers, insurance payments, credit building support, emergency funds for car repairs, even his security deposits and utility connections. The total came to over $95,000 in direct and indirect support since he turned 18. But here's where it got really interesting. Roy tried to argue that Tucker had been unaware of the extent of the trust support, which would prove that I had deliberately kept him dependent. So, the judge asked Tucker directly whether he had known about the monthly transfers and other payments. Tucker had to admit under oath that he had known about some of it, but said he thought it was just temporary help while he got established. That's when Declan dropped the real bombshell. He presented documentation showing that Tucker had actually requested increases to his monthly support twice in the past 2 years. Both times to cover expenses that he claimed were essential for his career development. One request was for additional money to attend a professional conference that Harper had wanted him to go to. The other was for help with the deposit on his current apartment, which Harper had insisted was in a better neighborhood for networking. Tucker's face went completely red when those documents came out. Roy tried to argue that requesting help from family was normal and didn't constitute acceptance of a dependent relationship. But the judge pointed out that Tucker had signed acknowledgement forms for both increases that specifically referenced his understanding of the trust terms and conduct requirements. Then Roy made a strategic mistake that changed everything. He started questioning my motivations for setting up the conduct clauses, suggesting that I had designed them to be triggered easily so I could cut Tucker off whenever I wanted. Roy argued that the clauses were evidence of a manipulative personality and that Tucker had been right to distance himself from my influence. That gave Declan the opening he needed to present evidence of Tucker and Harper's social media campaign against me. We had screenshots of every TikTok, every Instagram post, every comment where they had publicly humiliated me and encouraged others to mock my financial situation. Declan argued that this wasn't just family disagreement. It was a coordinated public attack designed to damage my reputation and justify cutting me out of Tucker's life. The judge asked Tucker to explain why he had participated in posting content that mocked my financial circumstances and encouraged others to view me as a manipulative parasite. Tucker tried to say that Harper had convinced him it was necessary to set boundaries. But his voice was shaking and he clearly knew how bad it looked. But the real turning point came when the judge asked about Harper's family's financial support during the legal challenge. Roy had to disclose that Harper's parents had been covering Tucker's living expenses for the past month, including rent, food, car payments, and legal fees. The judge asked Tucker whether he understood that this arrangement made him financially dependent on Harper's family in exactly the same way he claimed to object to with my trust. Tucker couldn't answer that question. He just sat there looking completely lost while Roy tried to argue that temporary support during a legal proceeding was different from long-term financial control. But the judge pointed out that Tucker had traded dependence on one family for dependence on another family and questioned whether he had actually achieved the independence he claimed to be seeking. Then something happened that I wasn't expecting. The judge asked Harper directly about her role in encouraging Tucker to challenge the trust. Harper had been sitting quietly through most of the hearing, but when the judge addressed her, she got defensive and started talking about how toxic family members use money to prevent people from moving forward with their lives. The judge asked Harper whether she had researched my financial situation before encouraging Tucker to challenge the trust. Harper admitted that her father had looked into my assets to determine whether I was using the trust appropriately. The judge then asked whether Harper's family had calculated how much it would cost to support Tucker if he successfully broke the trust, but then couldn't maintain his lifestyle independently. Harper said her family was committed to helping Tucker achieve financial independence regardless of the cost. But then the judge asked the question that changed everything. He asked whether Harper's family had considered what would happen to their financial support if Tucker's relationship with Harper ended. Harper got really flustered and said that wasn't relevant because she and Tucker were building a life together. But the judge pointed out that Harper's family support was contingent on Tucker's relationship with Harper, which made it a different kind of financial control than what Tucker was objecting to with my trust. The hearing ended with the judge saying he needed time to review all the evidence and would issue his decision within 2 weeks. But what happened after we left the courthouse was even more dramatic than the hearing itself. Tucker followed me to the parking lot and asked if we could talk privately. He looked absolutely devastated. And for the first time since this whole thing started, he seemed like the kid I raised instead of the stranger Harper had turned him into. Tucker said he had no idea how much financial support he'd been receiving from the trust and that Harper's family had convinced him it was just minimal help that he could easily replace with proper financial planning. Tucker admitted that living without the trust payments for the past month had been much harder than he expected. Even with Harper's family covering his major expenses, he was struggling with things like gas money, groceries, and basic necessities that he'd never had to budget for before. Tucker said he was starting to realize how much the trust had been protecting him from financial stress that he wasn't prepared to handle. But then Tucker said something that really surprised me. He said Harper had been getting increasingly frustrated with his financial dependence on her family and that she'd started making comments about how he needed to figure out how to support himself without constantly needing help. Tucker said Harper's parents were also starting to hint that their support was temporary and that he needed to develop a plan for financial independence. Tucker asked me whether there was any way to resolve this situation without destroying our relationship completely. He said he realized now that Harper had manipulated him into believing things about our relationship that weren't true and that he missed having me in his life. Tucker said he wanted to find a way to rebuild trust between us, but he was scared that he'd damaged things too badly to fix. I told Tucker that the decision wasn't just up to me anymore. The judge was going to rule on whether the conduct clauses were valid, and if they were upheld, Tucker would need to demonstrate genuine change in his behavior and attitude before the trust could be restored. I explained that public humiliation and social media attacks weren't things that could just be apologized away, and that rebuilding trust would require consistent effort over time. 2 days later, Amy called me with news that Harper had posted a new TikTok, announcing that she and Tucker were taking a break from their relationship to focus on personal growth. The video showed Harper packing up Tucker's belongings and talking about how important it was to prioritize your own financial stability before committing to supporting someone else's dreams. Tucker hasn't contacted me since that conversation in the parking lot, but Amy says she's seen him driving around town in his old car instead of the newer one that Harper's family had been helping him with payments on. Apparently, he's been staying at a friend's place because he couldn't afford his apartment rent without either the trust payments or Harper's family support. The judge's decision came down yesterday. The conduct clauses were upheld and Tucker's challenge was dismissed. The judge ruled that the clauses were reasonable protections for the trust assets and that Tucker's behavior had clearly violated the terms regarding respect for family relationships. The judge also noted that Tucker's willingness to accept financial support from Harper's family while challenging the trust suggested that his objections were not actually about achieving independence. But here's the part that really validated everything I've been saying. The judge specifically mentioned that Tucker's participation in the social media campaign against me showed a concerning lack of judgment and maturity that supported the original decision to include conduct clauses in the trust. The judge said that Tucker's behavior during this process had actually demonstrated why the protections were necessary. Tucker can reapply for reinstatement of his trust benefits in 6 months, but only if he can demonstrate that he's learned to manage his finances independently and that he's rebuilt his relationship with me based on genuine respect and appreciation. The judge made it clear that this isn't about me controlling Tucker's life. It's about Tucker proving that he's mature enough to handle the responsibility that comes with the trust assets. I never wanted things to go this far, but I'm not sorry that Tucker finally understands the real value of what he was so eager to throw away. Harper showed her true colors the moment things got difficult. And Tucker learned a hard lesson about the difference between people who genuinely care about your well-being and people who only support you when it's convenient for them. Some of you might think I was too harsh, but 15 years of genuine love and support deserved better than being publicly mocked and thrown away for someone who was using Tucker to make herself feel superior. Tucker has a lot of growing up to do, but at least now he knows what real family support looks like compared to the conditional acceptance he got from Harper's.